All right, Steeler fans, it is time for Behind Enemy Line segment. I always love this segment leading up to the games in the regular season. In week one, the Steelers play the Atlanta Falcons. We know this. So you've heard this guy on my podcast before, Scott Kennedy, who's been on to talk about Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson. Scott, welcome back to the program. How's it going?
And you're having me back. That's the surprise. I mean, you've had me on and you've invited me back. It's always a surprise to me. So yeah, now we get to talk Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson and Atlanta
Yes.
Falcons. And then I do a Broncos podcast. So I was explaining to my wife, I'm like, we've got this like love triangle going between Steelers, Falcons, and Broncos right now. So I'll be out the one of our friends, Mile High Huddle. They're doing their meet and greet. So I'll be at the Broncos Steelers game next week too.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. We're going to focus on week one. Let's get through this week. And this is a unique game down in Atlanta, 1:00, the way God intended football to be played on the NFL. And this is going to be intriguing. Let's start off with the fact that there's a lot of changes on the Falcons roster since they brought in Raheem Morris. They bring in a new coordinator. Gone is their quarterback. Gone is Cordero Patterson. In Justin Simmons. In Kirk Cousins. I could go on, but you know what I'm talking about. We talked before we hit record. We have not seen Kirk Cousins and a lot of these players yet in the preseason. So as a fan of the Falcons and someone that covers the team, what are your expectations for this team?
The good news is, and this I combine it all. So this isn't just a shot at Arthur Smith, because I've said this before, is the bar has been set so low by the Falcons offense last year and the way they piddled around and wasted the weapons and the poor quarterback play the last couple of years. The bar's been so low that I expect the offense to be better just purely through osmosis.
I get it.
It's like, oh, what if, I see people that I took issue with this. I'm like, well, this isn't the New York Jets. Okay. If Kirk Cousins isn't ready, they've got a rookie quarterback that is better than anybody they had last year. He's 24 years old. Michael Penix is better than Desmond Ridder. That's not a hot take. That's not a big hot take. So, but it's not just Kirk Cousins we haven't seen. Raheem Morris, new coach Raheem Morris, treats the entire preseason with disdain. So we haven't seen anybody. If they're like the first 30 guys may have seen 5 snaps all preseason. So they use internal scrimmage. They use the joint practices with Miami Dolphins, but we haven't really seen anything from what we're going to see other than what we've seen in the past.
Right. And so, let's talk about the health of the team. And so Kirk Cousins, everyone is looking at him, and he's supposed to be the guy. You mentioned Michael Penix, but we're not going to go there right now, not in week one. The ruptured Achilles tendon. I think that a lot of people will kind of poo-poo that injury, but that's a significant injury, especially for an aging player. What have the reports been about Kirk Cousins? You mentioned the internal scrimmage. You mentioned the joint practice. What have they seen from him so far?
Basically that it is a non-issue is what they've said so far. Is he's been a full go in all the practices, as much as quarterbacks are, because they're protected anyway.
Right.
But there was a play where he took off. I don't know if it was an interception or a strip or whatever, but all I remembered was chasing 50 yards down the field, Kirk Cousins, about giving Raheem Morris a heart attack. I'm like, okay, he feels good enough out there where he hasn't been held back in any significant way really this entire time. So going back to OTAs, he was out throwing. There's nobody near your feet. There's no it's different than getting sacked, but preseason, where you're not touching quarterbacks anyway, training camp where it's off hands, there you wouldn't know that he was coming off of an injury. That's what Sunday's for.
Exactly. So let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Zach Robinson, the new offensive coordinator, actually interviewed with the Pittsburgh Steelers for their vacancy, and then eventually went with Raheem Morris, who he spent time with in Los Angeles last year. Makes sense. They stay together. We again haven't seen much, but when the Falcons approach the offensive side of the football, every coordinator has something they want to do, whether it's ground and pound, whether it's spread them out, West Coast style offense. What are the Falcons? What's their bread and butter going to be this year, if you had to guess?
It's hard to say, honestly. I take issue with this. Like, oh, it's going to be such a big change because the Falcons played more 12 personnel than anybody in the NFL. And the Rams played more 11 personnel than anybody in the NFL. 12 personnel being 2 tight ends. Like, no, they didn't. Kyle Pitts has been a wide receiver since he put on a Falcons helmet.
True.
He's got like 19% of his snaps with his hand down in the rubber pellets. He had more snaps at X and Z out wide than he did in line with his hand down at tight end. This is a wide receiver. They're just playing 11 personnel with Kyle Pitts. So do they use Kyle Pitts more as a genuine wide receiver and then call it 4 wide receiver looks with a third wide receiver in Ray McLeod and then Darnell Mooney being the fourth one? That's kind of what we're all want to see. Or is Charlie Warner, who they paid a bunch of money to, going to be out there and they're still going to call this 12 personnel? It ain't 12 personnel, Kyle Pitts on the field.
Right.
So that's kind of what we want to see. The bread and butter, I didn't watch and study what they want to do, what they did in LA, but they're gonna run a lot of pre-snap motion. There should be a lot of quick passing game, and this offense is still, I firmly believe, gonna feed through Bijan Robinson. That's still gonna be the guy that gets the most touches every single game.
Yeah. As you would expect that to be the case. He's a dynamic playmaker, absolutely. And they do have other playmakers, but to me, I feel like still that this Falcons team, if they had a shot of improvement, I think their defense, especially you talk about the acquisition of Simmons. I mentioned him, Matthew Judon coming down to Atlanta. I think they have a pretty good defense. What's your take on the defensive side of the ball?
I think the defense was pretty good last year depending on what metric you looked at.
Yeah, I get it.
So it was their offense that held them back last year. They went so far back. So I expect this to be a top 10 offense. What are you talking about, Scott? What do you mean? If you go through the investment on the offensive side of the ball, from wide receiver all the way across the offensive line to your $100 million quarterback, it's first round picks. There's like nine guys on there, like 7 of them are first round picks. There's been huge investment on offense. Now, how good can this team eventually be? Are they going to be a team that wins a week NFC South and then they're an easy out in the playoffs? Or can they actually make some noise? To me, that's where the defense comes in. How good can they really be? And they've added some guys. They had the 3 biggest holes on this team coming in were quarterback, edge rusher, safety. All right. Kirk Cousins. Then they make a nice little trade for Matt Judon in 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before the season starts. And then they sign a guy that we've been advocating for. I mentioned Broncos for breakfast. Justin Simmons is a second team All-Pro like 4 out of the last 6 years. Leaving, there's a huge hole. You've got money. He's in his 30s, so he's not going to be overly expensive. Sign this guy. Well, they did eventually. That they've really upgraded the holes, and then their draft basically beefed up the second rotation of the defensive line. So they're deep on defense. How well they can all come together. They're still weak on the edge, relatively speaking, but they're strong up the middle. They're really strong up the middle.
All right, so I want you to take a second here and put a Pittsburgh Steelers hat on, and I want you to be Arthur Smith, and you're like, okay, I need to attack this Falcons defense. And I don't need you to dive into the Steelers roster or anything like that, but if you were a coordinator and you're trying to attack the Falcons, where are the soft spots on the defense? You mentioned edge, but how would you attack them on the offensive side?
I'd try and get my running game wide off tackle. And I would try to play to Russell Wilson's strength, which is out wide.
Yeah.
Who's the opposite corner? How good is Mike Hughes going to be? How good is Clark Phillips going to be? Who's undersized? AJ Terrell is good, but he's susceptible. A well thrown ball to George Pickens is going to be a completion. I don't care who's on him.
Yeah.
That's just the way the game is. So you're going to have to take your shots in the perimeter. That's part of that's not even just Arthur Smith. Part of that's the personnel you've got on your team.
Correct.
It's Russell Wilson does not use the middle of the field. So 2 of your best players are going to be Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates, arguably the best safety tandem on paper in the NFL. They're going to come wide. They're going to help protect the edge. And then you hope that your front 4 and your linebackers can deal with Najee Harris up the gut, Cordell Patterson, whoever's running second team up the gut. But the thing is, that's the strength of this Falcons defense is right up the middle. Yeah. So you're going to have to try and get wide, and it's going to be tougher to do with a quarterback that doesn't use the middle of the field. So I can cheat safeties out wide.
It's going to be a lot of good on good in that case with the Steelers if they do want to try and run up the middle. Are they going to
Yep.
have the beef up front? And you have Isaac Seumalo out with a pectoral injury. He was their anchor at guard. Zach Frazier, young rookie center. It's going to be difficult. It'll be interesting to see what they do. But let's flip the script. And now the Steelers defense, which I think is going to be a top 5 defense in the NFL if they can stay healthy. When you look at the improvements that have been made on the Falcons offense, if you're going to attack the Falcons offense, so defensively, what do you do?
Well, let's find out how good Kirk Cousins is early.
Yeah.
Let's make him beat you with the pass. I don't want to play off. I want to see if I can isolate Caleb McGarry at right tackle, because I don't think if I'm Zach Robinson, I do not let TJ Watt on Caleb McGarry one-on-one ever. Not once, unless it's a run play. That should be, if there's no help on the right side of the Falcons lines, it should be a tip that it's a run play, because he's a beast in the running game. He can't handle TJ Watt on his own in passing games. So win first down. I mean, they're cliches for a reason, but if you can keep the Falcons in second and long, then you can help dictate. They're not nearly as good pass blockers as they are run blockers. So you want, if you can limit if you can keep them in second long, third and long, keep them predictable, then you can force mistakes, because based on the offense that you just heard me poo-pooing for the Steelers, I got a lot of questions there, going down from your quarterback to 2 rookies and a banged up replacement on the offensive line to the lack of overall weapons on the perimeter. You're going to have to force turnovers to win games. That's just the way I see the Steelers right now.
I think that's a very fair assessment. And I think that the defense, especially early, as they go through these issues on the offensive line, the injuries, and Seumalo is supposed to return in about a month, which is still a couple weeks away. And the quarterback situation being the quarterback situation, the defense is going to have to carry this team. And so, it's tough to try and put a beat on this. On my podcast on Wednesday, I talked about some of Kirk Cousins' stats, but how do you do that? He didn't play in the preseason, and last year he only played in 8 games in Minnesota, which is a different team, a different offensive line. This is interesting. This matchup, it has a lot of intriguing components to it. But when you think about the outlook for this game, like when you're looking at this matchup in Atlanta, I'm sure there's going to be some hype surrounding the Falcons with the new regime and all the stuff we've already talked about. How do you see this game playing out?
Well, in the one wild card, this guy hasn't mentioned the wild card in here. To me, the wild card is Justin Fields' scrambling ability. That's the one where it starts to be like, all right, how do you account for that? I kind of feel like I see a similar situation for Justin Fields that he's faced his first 3 years in the league with Chicago. I mean, and I admire Mike Tomlin. I admire the Pittsburgh Steelers as a franchise and the things they've done. I just feel like this is a team in transition right now. I think the Falcons are on the back end of their transition. I think they're farther ahead. You've got several high draft picks on the offensive line. That's a rebuild. You missed on your quarterback in Kenny Pickett. Now you've got a reclamation project, actually 2 of them in the backfield. You got a reclamation project in Arthur Smith, to be honest with you. I've got a lot of questions on there. There's just not a ton of weapons on the perimeter. Is Arthur Smith worth a damn without Derrick Henry? We don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Is Russell Wilson, if he can match, and I've said this before, if he can match the numbers that he put up in Denver, Pittsburgh Steelers fans are going to be dancing in the streets. It was kind of a round peg square hole with Sean Payton and Denver Broncos, but he still threw 26 touchdowns against 8 or 9 interceptions. You take that in a heartbeat in Pittsburgh right now.
Yeah.
I just think the Falcons are farther ahead in where they are in a franchise with all of the high draft picks, getting out of then being able to supplement some of their holes in free agency. That the only way the Steelers come to Atlanta and beat the Falcons in week 1 is if, then we use this as a verb and as an adjective, as a noun, is if they falcon things up down here. Where it comes down to, this is the Steelers, the blue-blooded franchise, and this is one of the 5 worst franchises in the NFL, and weird stuff just happens to teams on different ends of the spectrum. These teams find a way to lose. This team finds a way to win. But right now, I think the Falcons are farther ahead. I think they're a better team than the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, playing at home, and should win this game.
So just to go back for a second, something you said. So if you're the Falcons, are you expecting a Justin Fields package throughout the game? Because personally, as a Steeler fan, I think that's all. I think that's Mike Tomlin blowing smoke. I don't think he's going to Russell Wilson off the field unless it's sadly, I hate to say this, I feel like it's going to be so obvious when Justin Fields gets put onto the field that it's like giant red flags are going up around the stadium saying, here comes a run or a run option, read option, whatever you want to call it. I don't see that happening so much, but you do.
I do, because I've watched him torch the Falcons before.
Yeah.
Justin Fields, from a tool standpoint, he's more toolsy in every aspect than Russell Wilson. That's what makes him so tantalizing as a prospect.
Yeah.
But he's got the issues. And how much of that, again, how much do you want to blame on the situation in Chicago versus, his limitations as a quarterback? I expect to see Justin Fields. So, he's a Georgia kid. He grew up 30 minutes from the stadium in Kennesaw, Georgia.
Yeah.
And I don't think you beat the Falcons without him doing something special in the running game, honestly.
Well,
unless again, they Falcon things up and there's 3 turnovers because McGarry can't block TJ Watt. But it's if the Falcons don't lose the turnover battle by a lot, I think they can lose it like 1 and still win this game. But as long as they don't beat themselves, they should win this game, because I do not have much faith in the Steelers offense this year.
Hey, that's fair. Like I'm not going to be upset. Do you have a score in mind? Do you have any numbers?
What did I said it earlier because we did the Falcons podcast earlier this week, and I said you always have to go by 3s and 6s because the Falcons haven't been good in the red zone, but they got a good kicker.
Yeah.
So I think somewhere in the neighborhood, if I went 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals, 20-10, something along those lines, or maybe 23-13, Falcons over Steelers. I just don't think the Steelers are scoring without their defense. And that could be a thing. There's 3 phases to this game: strip sack and interception, something along those lines. And the score changes rapidly, but just Steelers offense by itself, to me, scares the hell out of me.
Well, folks, those are your positive vibes for the Steelers fans listening to this from Scott Kennedy.
Hey, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm right. And part of my bias, I've said that non-biased is an oxymoron. There's no such thing. Bias makes up our personalities. Recognize your bias and trying to compensate for it is how you try and come off as neutral or non-biased. There's no such thing as non-biased. My bias is I watched Russell Wilson for the last 2 years in Denver. Every game of his. He won't use the middle of the field. Just flat out won't use it.
Yeah.
He's a chaos merchant who doesn't run nearly as well as he does. He's a one read, spin out of there, and one read and spin, which his offensive linemen freaking hate. Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator was a disaster in Atlanta. That's the things I know. Now, how does that mesh in Pittsburgh with 2 rookies on the offensive line and your best offensive lineman watching from the sidelines? It doesn't make me feel good as someone saying, okay, how good can this Pittsburgh Steelers team be? That's what I see. And those are my biases kicking in. We'll put them right out there for you.
Hey, fair enough. All right, Scott, I do appreciate your time. Tell everyone where they can get all the content that you do, the Falcons podcast, all that good stuff that you do for Fans for Sports Network. Go ahead and talk about social media, all that stuff.
Yeah, just the place where you can find all my places. You can go to X, and I'm at Scout Kennedy, or then just youtube.com/Scott Kennedy. Those are the 2 places you'll find all of my stuff. And we do a lot of different things between different teams, some college stuff, Senior Bowl, do a lot of that too. So come and say hey. And like I said, the only way you're not going to be wrong is to never make predictions. I'll never tell you I'm right beforehand. I'll tell you what I think, and I'm here for it afterwards when I'm wrong.
Love it. Scott, I appreciate your time as always, man. Take it easy. Enjoy the game this weekend.
Appreciate it.